get you introduced to the group shortly here. But just wanted to welcome everyone to the fourth meeting of the County Executive's Affordable Housing Work Group, which is a public body that the county executive assembled to take a look at some of the critical issues related to housing and housing opportunity throughout Baltimore County. And we have, again, a diverse group of stakeholders here who've been doing a lot of hard work. And to thank everybody for all the work that you've been putting in on the subcommittees and in these meetings, and just sharing some ideas among fellow work group members. So, we're a few months into our work now, so I wanted to thank everybody for sticking with us. I think we can go ahead and get started on the agenda. It's 4 minutes after 3 o'clock. So we do just have a quick administrative item of business to do, and that's the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. And then we'll get in to the presentation from our guest today. The minutes were distributed to everybody in advance prior to the meeting. So we'll just take a moment and ask if anyone has any corrections or suggested edits to the minutes. If not, we'll take a motion to approve.
I take a motion that we approve the minutes as read. This is Gloria Nelson.
Second.
Any objections or corrections before we approve? Hearing none, we will go ahead and consider the minutes approved. They'll be uploaded to our work group's webpage shortly for everyone to review.
I was going to make sure the attendance is correct, because I have attended a couple of them. I don't think my name showed up. It was Ned Howe.
Okay, we'll make a note of that. Lisa, would you make a note of Ned Howe's attendance? Just make sure that that's appropriately captured.
Yes.
They're uploaded.
Yes, I'll double check. I'll double check the rest of it as well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Lisa, would you mind sharing the agenda? Thank you. So we, following the format of some of our previous meetings, we have a special guest today to come speak with us about some of the issues that this work group is working on. So we're pleased to have Melody Taylor, who is the regional director of Hud Assisted Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. Melody's been working hand in hand with the county on issues related to the VCA. And our team thought would have some insights and some important information to share with us that's very relevant to the work that we're doing here. We also thought Melody would be a very good person to have available to answer questions about this work in Baltimore County. So I'm going to let Terry Hickey, who's the director of new Office of Housing and Community Development, give a more proper introduction of Ms. Taylor. And then, Taylor, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and getting into your sharing your thoughts about this issue and more on it. So, Terry.
Great. Well, Melody, thanks again for taking the time. I know you've got a lot on your plate, including helping work with us on any number of issues. And Drew did a pretty good job. Just in case people don't know, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity under HUD, for which you are the regional director for the Atlantic office. I'll let folks know that Melody serves the region in implementing programs and policies in all matters related to fair housing, economic opportunity, civil rights, and non-discrimination in the implementation of HUD programs. And I don't get to introduce Melody very often. We're in meetings quite a bit together. Everybody knows her when we're there. So most of you may be familiar with her here. But like Drew said, we really felt that with the Biden administration and with a new HUD secretary firmly in place, affordable and fair housing has really regained some footing. And there's a lot of great movement starting all the way at the top. President Biden, recent activity. And so, Melody, we thought it might be great to talk about some recent developments, some national trends, and then to the degree that you think things apply directly to Baltimore and the work of this work group, we'd love you to share. And then I imagine there will be a lot of good questions and some discussion. So I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Terry. I don't feel like a guest at all, quite frankly. Many of the faces that I see are faces that I've worked with throughout the year. So this is more a conversation than a presentation, quite frankly. But I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about affordable housing and fair housing. I know that oftentimes they're used in separate context, but given the administration's drive, executive orders, and the push for us to look at housing and all functions of our society through a lens of equity and race, we can't walk away thinking that affordable housing is separate and apart from fair housing. And so the lens that we use in planning and creating strategies around affordable housing, we have to keep equity in mind. So when we think about affordable housing, we think about, for me, patterns of segregation, history, the legacy of segregation, the lack of affordable housing in communities, and quite frankly, how it happened, right? So we have to take a look back. We have, in order for us to fix problems, we have to look back to how they happened. And that's a big part of your regional planning effort. I see Dan on in my viewpoint here, and the working group that put together the regional planning effort. Part of that work was to look back at some of the historical patterns of discrimination. So how things happened and where we got to where we are today. And the government is not, and I'm speaking federal, is not, remiss from contributing to where patterns of segregation have happened, where the siting of housing happens, the concentration of poverty. When I think about the government, FHA loans, where we placed public housing, Section 8, and the siting of public housing are all great contributors to the problem that state governments and local governments are now having to figure out, how do we move away from that? How do we plan affordable housing in a way that supports fair housing and affirmatively furthering fair housing efforts? And so we have to take a look at our zoning decisions currently, right? Citing where we cite housing, community opposition, our zoning regulations, whether or not we're placing housing in commercial zones, or whether or not we could have structures that would allow for residential housing to be placed in a particular neighborhood. The use of land and your land use planning, those documents happen every 10 years. And so when you think about the change and the shift in how people migrate and how land is developed, a 10-year look is a large period of time. So what can we do as a county to think about better approaches and strategies to truncate how we're going to do our affordable housing business. So things that I think that are worth remembering, I actually have a slide presentation here that you're not seeing, but I'll share it out with Terry so you can have it available to you. But so it's worth remembering in all of this, there is an obligation to affirmatively further fair housing, right? And HUD imposes that on all facets of federal government. So not just the county, your transportation divisions, right? All facets of entities that receive federal dollars are required to affirmatively further fair housing. So when you're thinking about affordable housing strategies and planning, your departments of transportation, they should be at the table. They have a duty to affirmatively further fair housing. When you think about historically where highways and thoroughfares have been placed in communities, it has an effect. It has an effect on the valuation of properties. It has an effect. And so having your Department of Transportation at the table is important. The indicators that we're looking at in terms of walkability scores and other things, it all matters as it relates to how you're planning a community. And so all the players should be at the table. And then finally, the part of the obligation is to ensure that actions taken within the control of the entity that receives the money fulfills the mission and the goal to have open, integrated residential housing patterns and to prevent the increase of segregation. So we want to make sure that as we're planning through our affordable housing strategies, we have integration in mind. And where integration doesn't happen, we have economic investment in mind. So I want to be clear, there are communities that are historically African-American or historically Latino communities that may exist, that have been undervalued, that are not considered a neighborhood of opportunity. So when you're thinking about how to make affordable housing available, what to do, so it's not to reconcentrate and reconstitute poverty. The goal is to economic advantage and opportunity. And how do we do that, right? So if you have a community that is marginalized or disadvantaged, let's not think about the Band-Aid effect. Let's think about how do we make this community more viable? Are there healthcare opportunities that we could put here? Are there economic communities that can be anchored in this investment to bring this community up to a neighborhood of opportunity, and then create those intersections and join that community with other communities so that there's some continuity throughout the county. So what HUD considers as it relates to affordable housing are balanced approaches and a balanced approach to affordable housing strategies, which would mean that we have not been very prescriptive about the strategies that are undertaken. And I feel like that's a great need for a number of the jurisdictions, not just in this region, but around the country, right? The technical assistance and the need to assist in how affordable housing strategies are planned out. And then what are some of the best practices and approaches that others are using around the country that have been successful in doing this work? So what many of you may know is that the county and HUD, by way of the VCA, we've commissioned some technical assistance currently to help us build capacity around the existing work of the voluntary compliance agreement. But there's also an ask and an opportunity for the county to benefit from technical assistance that will help build out the affordable housing strategy. And what's pretty wonderful about the technical assistance that HUD provides is that we've been able to secure some of the foremost experts in fair housing, affordable housing, public housing, and these individuals have done work around the country. And so what we can glean from this technical assistance are opportunities for the county to benefit from the work and the experiences that the technical assistance providers bring based on their work around the country. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about are place-based and mobility strategies. And so I'll start with mobility because under the VCA, we're currently undertaking a mobility approach through the mobility counseling program. So by way of the VCA, there's a requirement of the 2,000 vouchers to be disseminated and used and help people opportunity to move to opportunity. And so Marcia and her team are working in tandem with residents and working to help them to find housing opportunities, working with landlords, creating incentives to have landlords to participate in the program. Baltimore has done actually mobility counseling well, better than most than around the country. So Quadell and others, you know, you're sitting in the backyard of folks who have done this work. I will say additionally, part of the team of folks that Dan Pontius and others were able to bring together to do the regional planning effort, you had folks in the room who were working on that or consulting with Dan and others to put the plan together, who have done work in Denver and, you know, Kansas City. So you're resource rich in the opportunity to dialogue and talk and to be able to think through your affordable housing strategies and approaches, just based on past work that has been done and the ability to reach out and touch some of these people who have done some existing work and future work around affordable housing strategies. So place-based strategies could include making investments in high poverty neighborhoods, as I just talked about, to improve the conditions, to eliminate disparities, to increase access to opportunity. Other place-based strategies, maintaining and preserving existing affordable rental housing stock, right? And that can include HUD Assisted Housing to reduce disproportionate housing needs. I know many of you are aware of the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, which has had substantial investment across the country, is creating opportunities to preserve and/or to create opportunities for affordable rental housing throughout communities. So housing authorities have the opportunity to create what's called a transfer of assistance opportunity to nonprofit agencies who are doing the housing work, who are doing affordable housing work, and to help absorb wait lists, et cetera. And so HUD looks at the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program as yet just another portfolio of business that can help a community divest some of the concentrations, create opportunities for scattered site, and to reduce wait lists, quite frankly. Again, just wanted to touch bases on the mobility strategies again. As I mentioned, the county and its mobility program and the access to mobility agencies in the area, you're absolutely resource rich there. I think it's important, something that, you know, used to be a part of a discussion was mobility, the counseling side of it, right? Making sure that individuals who are moving into other communities have access to resources, those other things that to help sustain the success of an individual moving to a different community. I think those are important parts and components of mobility strategy programs and should be something that we should continue to consider and continue to grow and work on as we're thinking about mobility strategies. So just a couple of other opportunities, just to give some food for thought as it relates to place-based strategies. Building rehabilitation as a part of a concerted community revitalization effort, right? So where there are aged housing stock, old housing stock, are there opportunities for rehabilitation to create affordable housing opportunities? New construction of mixed income housing designed to integrate racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. Commercial redevelopment. So again, anchoring in those other investments in a community. I'll tell you, I had a project in Philadelphia, historically Latino neighborhood. Housing Authority sought to create a RAD, transfer of assistance, and there was pushback because the community was concentrated. But as we looked through the application and started to unpackage the revitalization area opportunity, we saw that Amtrak had anchored into that community, right? With some investments. We saw that there was a healthcare entity that had decided to relocate to that particular community. And so with those anchoring investments, brought about community change. And so about think beyond your doors and into the doors of your commercial, your private industry. If you don't seek them out, they may not seek you out, but there are opportunities to build an arm of your government or of your agencies to work with private industry to bring about change. I think about Amazon. Amazon right now has an affordable housing program. They're putting $30 million in Virginia. In the small state of Delaware, Amazon's coming. And they have an affordable housing program that they're going to embark upon. Delaware has an eastern and a western side. The eastern side dovetails into all of our resort and our beaches here. The western side of the town doesn't have transportation. It doesn't have affordable housing. There's dilapidation there. And Amazon is coming to town. And part of the discussion is, how do we anchor into Amazon to help support the needs of the community? If you're going to do business in our community, then you have to help support our communities. And those are conversations that you should think about having as you're planning through your affordable housing strategies. And something that I think we probably don't do enough of is the interagency coordination, right? Housing doesn't exist alone. And as I mentioned, the notion of having the Department of Transportation at the table, but also your justice departments and criminal justice needs. You have reentry programs, your healthcare programs, right? All the things that make up a community should be a part of an interagency discussion about how mobility can work, how place-based housing and affordable housing can work in a community. So just a couple other thoughts, and then I will stop talking because I don't want to be the talking head. But I know that you guys are all familiar with in 2016 we rolled out the new AFFH and the assessment of fair housing, and we went through a couple of hurdles. Came back, it was rescinded. We're now back in business in some regard. Let me just tell you a bit about the interim final rule. And as it relates to your planning strategies, what it does is it brings back the definitions of what affirmatively furthering fair housing continues to mean in my vocabulary and vernacular. The definition was reduced and changed quite a bit under the 2020 rule. And so the interim final rule brings back the definitions that requires states and jurisdictions and anyone who receives the federal dollars to ameliorate existing, housing issues or impediments to fair housing, and that those strategies and action plans be measurable and that there's evidence thereof that you've done that work in your community. And so, albeit right now under the interim final rule, it does not require a submission of the planning document of the AI or AFH, however you so choose to call it. But again, in your planning, you should have that document available. It should be sourced and ready for your use as you're planning your affordable housing strategy. It's purposed to identify those issues that are impediments and barriers to fair housing choice, and to put a plan in place and to not use the AI or the AFH as a source document doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes great sense to have it as a source document. You should be making your decisions based on data, not on your community opposition, right? And so we know that that exists, but you can't make your decisions based on community opposition. I want to just say that really clearly. You have to make your decisions based on the data and impact analysis and whether it adversely affects a protected class group. Can you expand opportunity? Will you create opportunities in your communities? That is how you should be making your decisions about your affordable housing approach. It should not be based on the pushback from a community. And we all know that that's a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Some of the analysis that you should take into consideration when you're looking at your data, again, patterns of segregation by race, national origin, or disability. And we know that two of those elements, the race and disability, were issues of the VCA. And so are particular areas that should be focused on. How do we create accessible housing? What's the approach to making sure that accessible housing is developed? Are new developers aware and understand the requirements of 504 ADA and making sure that housing is accessible, right? That data, that analysis, those questions are things that you should always consider as you're thinking through your affordable housing strategies. Your local ordinances, do they limit development of affordable housing, right? So we have to do deep dives into our own data. I mentioned that the federal government was a great contributor. So even in our own backyards, we need to look at the ordinances, we need to look at our zoning regulations and figure out, what I'll speak to federal government. What government doesn't do well, we don't always align the authors of the work with the actual work that's being done. And so sometimes the authors may not have the understanding or may not wear the lens of affordable housing. And so when they're authoring a document, that's not the analysis. But we have to train up the people who are doing our writing to understand that they have to wear an equity lens when they're making policy and writing about policy that may impact a particular community. So taking a look at your zoning and land use documents and ordinances to make sure that what you've put forward actually doesn't have a discriminatory effect on any particular protected class community. Other areas that I think that we, and I use we collectively, not the county specifically, but just in general, our LEP access and our LEP population, making sure that we keep our thumb on the pulse in those areas are analytics that sometimes get omitted from the conversation and the strategies around building affordable housing. And again, just thinking through where there are inconsistencies that have been applied in policy decisions and whether or not it has a discriminatory impact. And if you see something, you have to say something. So if you see something in your analysis, as a jurisdiction, it requires that you attempt to mitigate the circumstances, to create policies or strategy that will revert the particular issue that impacts the protected class community. Again, with affordable housing in mind. Couple other things, and you guys could speak more clearly about this than I, but something that I've seen throughout the region are, residency preferences in local communities. And so I had a case in Delaware County in PA where this local residency preference was purposed, sometime around the 70s. But as data changes and communities change, so too do the demographic data changes, right? And so this particular residency preference had a disparate impact on people who lived outside of Delaware County. So not coincidentally, the county that they chose not to give higher points to benefit from being able to live in the county happened to be a community, Chester, PA, which is a predominantly African-American community. And so when residents and people from Chester applied for housing with Delaware County, they naturally did not get the point preference that folks who lived and resided in Delaware County. And so in order for an individual to get to affordable housing in Delaware County based on this residency, it would take almost 12 to 15 years. And so the individual that applied did his own test. He applied with a person who lived in the county and he lived outside the county, and naturally he never made the list to get affordable housing. So things that again, they may be historical in nature and may have benefited point in time. But we always have to update, revitalize, and make sure that our agencies are aligned with the current trends and the current demographics to ensure that old policy doesn't perpetuate segregation and does not perpetuate diminishing opportunities to affordable housing. So I will add one other thought here, just in terms of the low-income tax credit housing and how that plays out in communities. It's purpose to build low-income housing in neighborhoods that are marginalized. That doesn't always benefit the neighborhood, and so I've spoken at events where I get pushback about, the notion that affordable housing is being built, right? Again, balanced approach should always be the strategy when you're thinking about your low-income tax housing credits. Where is it being built? Can you leverage other economic benefits in a community? You don't want to get in the business of continuing to perpetuate areas of concentration and poverty. The purpose of trying to deconcentrate and create opportunity is to build out opportunity, right? And what are those anchoring investments that can happen in a community that makes a community viable? I do an exercise sometime. I tell people to close their eyes and tell me what you drive home to. And people drive, when they start telling me about their communities, they have paved roads and dry cleaners, and they have grocery stores and all kinds of stuff in their community. And when I'm talking to people who may not have means, their drive home is very different. There aren't grocery stores, there aren't dry cleaners, there aren't gas stations, there aren't things that make their community viable. And so it's a simple ask to make a community a viable community. What are the amenities that can make that community work? How can we get the schools? How can we anchor in those other things that makes a community where people can go home to and their children can benefit from, is the ultimate goal. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions I might be able to ask or respond to, and may ask some questions as well. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melody.
Yeah, thank you, Melody. That was really insightful and helpful. And I would like to open it up to the members of our work group here to further leverage your expertise on these issues by asking any questions that you have about anything Melody presented today, or anything that's been on your mind as we've gone about this.
I see a question in the chat box.
Yeah, we have. I see that as well. Mr. Cantori is not a member of the work group, but is an observing member of the public. Members of the public are able to view these sessions and submit questions via chat. So if you don't mind, Melody, we'll break the ice with Mr. Cantori's here, and he asks about single-family zoning and the impact that has in terms of being a barrier to creating additional affordable housing.
Sure. Based on his question, it appears that he thinks that HUD is responsible for zoning or the designation of single-family zoning in a community. HUD doesn't have that responsibility. Zoning happens by way of community. So city councils, other operating political arms in a particular community create the zoning and land use regulations for a community. HUD does not take that responsibility.
Yeah, thank you for that response. And certainly zoning questions are within the scope of this work group. We have one of our subcommittees that is focused on looking at zoning and looking at infrastructure questions. And I think that's certainly a relevant question and something that will be addressed in the recommendations of the work group.
I can, I'm not sure who was actually talking about HUD, but regardless, I'm on the zoning subcommittee. Leslie Dickinson. Hi.
Hi, Leslie.
Thank you, Melody, for that presentation. I kind of lost my train of thought, but we really need to address the zoning and the in the county. And since I lost my train of thought, that's all I'll say about that. But I do actually have a question for you, Melody. It's kind of a technical, it has to do with the RAD, the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, because does the county need to have public housing in order to take advantage of RAD, or can they get those subsidies regardless?
That's something I will have to take a look at, because the county operates a bit differently because they're only financing, so they don't really have a portfolio of public housing in their inventory to convert or to create a rental assistance demonstration opportunity. I don't think that they would be a benefactor, but
Right.
that could be evaluated. But based on current definitions and evaluations, there wouldn't be a opportunity there.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, if I may, Melody, this is Steve Lafferty. Good to see you again. Thank you very, very much for participating today. Really, the subcommittee that I'm chairing has, in a sense, already pulled out the concept of place-based strategies. really focused on existing communities as an area in which we need to spend time, not just focused on new development activity. So in your experience in the communities you've observed, are there particular key initiatives that have been undertaken that really have sort of sparked those efforts? I mean, has it primarily been rehabilitation? Is it moving people from renters to homeowners, or any other particular elements that went into those place-based strategies that you thought were most effective?
So the data element is, I think, is really key to making those decisions. You have a census tract that is 75–80% rental. Then the objective would be to create mixed income, stabilize the community more, bring in some single family housing, and mix it up. If you have a community or a neighborhood where you have older housing stock, so you really have to get into, I think, studying and creating community profiles to determine the best place-based strategy to employ. And I think, the extra is to make sure that you don't create one size fits all approaches. And so, again, making sure you have a diverse portfolio of how you approach your place-based strategies in communities where you know that there's some historical elements to a community. It could be stable, it could be vital. There are some communities that exist and they need that lift, right? How do you lift the community up versus those communities where they may not have opportunities for anchoring investments. And then things you have to pay attention to are, neighborhoods that are gentrifying, right? When I speak balanced approach, you really do have to weigh in on your data and make sure that you're creating opportunities for people to benefit from the viability of a community, paying attention to gentrification and all those things. So it really does, data does drive it, I think, in large part.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Melody. This is Stacy again. As always, thank you for your support. We do appreciate the working relationship with you and your team as we've been working over the last 2.5 years to move forward with pieces of our VCA compliance. But my question is our subcommittee on communication. We've talked here and there about a strategy, literally what is affordable/fair housing, how to help communities understand that the perspective of that it is not. Any recommendations you have from that perspective that you could share with us would appreciate it as well.
You were breaking up just a bit, Stacy, but if I heard you, you're asking, are there communication strategies that I can recommend for communities so that they understand the difference between affordable and fair housing, or just
No.
understanding of what affordable housing is?
Affordable/fair housing, what it is, because we believe that's a part of the problem. And case studies in areas where you've seen that successfully done would be helpful for us as well.
Yeah, so I saw in your minutes that you had a meeting with Montgomery County. Montgomery County has had a long-standing history of creating opportunities for moderately priced dwelling units and affordable housing. And that model has been used in many states across the country. You can look at your land, developing land trusts around affordable housing strategies. But I think what's important is that people understand the income that supports an affordable housing purchase is the most relevant part of the discussion. I think it's a stigma that gets created around affordable housing because a house, right now the market is hot, and a house that's $300,000 is now being a home, and it's not affordable if your median income is 50% or below. That's not an affordable home. And so I think making sure that in the communications that people understand the income requirement for an affordable home and what that means. If my income is at, I just had this conversation a few months ago here in Delaware. I have a developer who is goodwill and in good faith wants to build what he deems to be affordable housing here. And those homes are somewhere around $275,000. The median income for a person in Delaware in the Sussex County area is $37,000. $37,000 will not support the purchase of a $275,000 home and allow for a person to be able to eat and live in a $275,000 home. And so I think the conversations around what truly is affordable based on median income for low income and median income persons is the critical part of the conversation. And that has to be made clear to decision makers that they're not caught up in the context or the vernacular of affordable housing, but they understand that what it really means when you define it, you have to get to the income of the demographics in your community to understand what affordable is.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely have our work cut out on that.
You're not alone in it.
We've been talking about that same question. Well, that question came up in the zoning subcommittee. And I think it's come up with Stacy before. And that's a very good way you presented it, Melody. From the flip side, what I tend to say is, well, the VCA requires X percent, 30% AMI and X percent, 60%. I don't remember what the percentages are. So to me, in terms of at least fulfilling the VCA, that's the percentages. Whatever that translates into actual affordability. So like in the subcommittee, they want to talk about, well, they want to go outside of the VCA and say, well, let's talk about, up to 80% AMI. And I'm like, well, that's fine, I guess, once the county is able to actually satisfy and be in full compliance with the VCA. So it's a little bit frustrating because we have this group and all the people at the top, like Stacy and Terry, and then we have the other groups, and they're just kind of like, oh, we want to do this and this and this, and I'm like, well, the VCA, we need to be in compliance with the VCA. So anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, anyone?
I think to meet the requirements of the VCA should be the goal, right? That should be the golden standard right now. And if we could get there, then we can consider other things. I think we have to help people understand that the VCA was purposed. It was a resolution to what had been historical instances of not making housing available and affordable to that particular subset of persons. And so, it's almost like a campaign of sorts that you have to create around the particular issue to help people understand that there's a target group here that's not being served, and we want to be able to serve them. And this is the way that we're going to be able to do so. Any other comments, thoughts, concerns, or questions? And if I can't answer them, I'll loop back around and try to get you an answer.
Melody, this is Dan Pontius with BMC, if I'm coming through here.
Dan?
Hi, thanks for the shout out for our regional AI. One of the things we've been doing in this group is looking at communications, since there's a tension between these, federal legal requirements and then the local public opinion sometimes. And we've been talking with Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who did great work at Enterprise and now has her own shop called The Case Made. And I'm just kind of curious if you're familiar with other examples of other places in Region 3 or around the country where local governments have used that type of assistance. I mean, she's done, research with focus groups and to sort of see what are the sort of narratives, the stories that people have in their heads when they hear about affordable housing in their communities or near their communities. And I'm just kind of curious if that's sort of, if you're aware of that, or if that's in your bailiwick in terms of technical assistance, in terms of helping local governments sort of navigate that public opinion piece.
Yeah, I will say when we worked with the city of Philadelphia on their first assessment of fair housing, they really got in the weeds on making sure that the message and the information surrounding the data, that people could understand it. We do this work all day, every day, right? And so there's a certain level of understanding that we have. But when you start dealing with, in fact, they reached out they created an advisory neighborhood app and started sending out information and socializing advisory neighborhood committees surrounding the data in their assessment of fair housing. They reached out to over 35,000 people when they did their first AFH. And we were all new at this game. And so I think the whole communications strategy, you have to have a strategy. And it requires that you socialize people around what they can understand about what this data means. Most people don't know what 30% of, what does that mean, 30% of AMI, right? And I bet if you did a survey or a poll with all your county council people, they probably don't know what it means either, but they're making decisions about it, right? So how do you make a decision about something that you really don't know, just because you've anchored yourself in a word called affordable? So we have to, I think, get in the business of really defining and breaking down information to our decision makers, but also to the community at large, so that they understand the decisions that are being made about how you live and work is around this particular data set, and make it not so data driven, but anecdotal and a level of understanding. And I think that's probably, I'm not totally familiar with Dr. Tiffany's work, but I think that's a direction that she's gone in with it. Seems quiet on the home front. I will tell.
Just one quick question, Melody. You mentioned, sorry, this is more of a point of order. You mentioned your slide presentation that you were using to speak from. Two questions on that. Is that something that you can provide to the work group? And if so, is that something that we could post publicly on our work group's webpage as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, not seeing any additional questions. Melody, I want to thank you so much for taking a portion of your afternoon to spend with us today. It was very informative, and I know will help inform our work and our ultimate recommendations moving forward. So thank you very, very much.
Great.
Thank you, Melody.
Thank you.
Melody.
Melody, you're free to stay with us, or you're free to sign off.
in the world of Zoom, I have a meeting in 2 minutes. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to working with you.
Perfect timing then. Great.
Thank you, Melody.
Thank you.
Okay. Lisa, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the agenda again, I think at this point we're moving to report outs from each of our subcommittees. And we don't necessarily need to go in the order in which they are listed. So I'll go ahead and ask if any of our chairs or co-chairs want to volunteer to go first.
I can go first.
Thank you, Pete.
Sure. It should be quick. We met a couple weeks ago. I think Leslie alluded to a number of things that we discussed in our work group for zoning and infrastructure. I should clarify that for everyone. We are the zoning and infrastructure subcommittee. After reviewing a lot of Jen Meacham's work on the data about how much is zoned for multifamily, how much is within the URDL, how much land is available, it was a realization that there isn't a lot of opportunity for multifamily types of developments to occur, regardless of affordability or not. So there was a lot of discussion moving forward from that point as to what were some of the ideas and thoughts that we should be dealing with. A lot of back and forth on a couple of different issues, but there was conversation of expanding the types of zoning classifications where affordable multifamily housing could be located in the inside the URDL. There was also discussions of the processes as well, basically providing for affordable housing an administrative approval process, much like the limited exemption that we have for other types of development in Baltimore County. So there was discussion about opening up affordable housing for those administrative processes that can be done a little quicker. And then there was obviously, as Leslie alluded to, a lot of conversation about the definition of affordable housing. Okay, if we do these things for these types of developments, what qualifies as affordable housing? Is it an AMI? Is it a type of development? Is it, certain characteristics, as we know, that's involved with the VCA? Is it family oriented? Is it 3+ bedrooms? We go into that level of detail. I kind of went farther into the weeds than we probably should have, but we did discuss a lot of the things that we definitely need a definition of affordable housing when we go through this process of expanding the capabilities of providing affordable housing in different locations and areas throughout the county. Leslie, did I miss anything? Oh, I should mention, we are scheduling the next meeting about infrastructure. We wanted to bring in Public Works as a speaker to talk about the basic services map and those types of things, and the capital improvement program and things associated with what's planned for the future in different areas of the county associated with water and sewer, roads, those kinds of things. So that was my quick report out. Leslie, is there anything more?
I would just add that in the discussion about the definition of affordable housing and what level of AMI, part of that was related to, and I forget if it was David, I forget who brought this up, but it was whoever's done work in Anne Arundel County. And so it has to do with waiving certain requirements for the developer, and therefore that's another reason what qualifies for affordable housing is pretty significant, because you're getting certain waivers. And so there's an Anne Arundel County bill that can be looked up, which I have somewhere. Actually, I'll just send it out. That's sort of a model to make it easier for affordable housing to be built, at least more affordable for it to be built for the developers. And that is part of what triggered the discussion of, well, what would it go up to? Would it go up all the way to 80% AMI and you would still get these benefits, or would it be, more limited at the 60% that's in the VCA? But I can just send an email that has that. I forget the bill number, but it's there it was the workforce housing bill. So All right. I think you covered everything very well, Pete. Thank you. Your email says that you're on vacation. Maybe you are.
Not anymore.
Good reminder on the out of office update there. So thank you, Leslie.
I thought I turned that off. Okay.
Well, it was a couple days ago, so you may have. Yeah.
Okay.
It said, but you said you were going to be out until like August 19th or something. So that's I was surprised to see.
Whoops. All right.
Here he is. So this is sort of another point of order that I think is a relevant question to all of the subcommittees. But I think the original vision that we discussed at our first meeting is that this group would convene monthly for 6 meetings, and at that time be in a position to make some recommendations to the county executive. One of the things that other similar work groups have done is to come up with a draft report and have it posted for public feedback, public comment for some period of time. So my proposal, and it's up for discussion, obviously, but my proposal is that, we strive to deliver that, draft product, by our 6th meeting, and then have it posted for some period of time beyond that 6th meeting for public review and public comment that can then be reviewed by the work group and incorporated into the final product as necessary and as appropriate. So I wanted to get a sense of, based on the work of the subcommittees, we feel like we're on track for that. So I wanted to raise that and also ask our chairs and co-chairs, if you feel like you're going to be in a position to start elevating some recommendations back to the larger work group here for discussion. So Steve, I saw some content from your committee that it looks like some recommendations, or at least some topical areas, are starting to be outlined. So it looks like some of that work is happening. But I just wanted to put that on the table, just in terms of timeline and moving forward. Petey, how do you feel about all of that? And Leslie, from your committee's perspective?
I think the recommendations are, sort of getting focused, at least from the zoning side. I don't know about the infrastructure. We haven't really started that, but I don't know how much that will impact any delay in getting a draft report together. I see it's coming together. Yeah. Okay. Leslie, do you have any thought?
Okay, and that would be October, because we're in the 4th meeting, right?
Yeah, so our 6th meeting would be in October, correct?
So basically you meant like an October deadline?
Correct.
Yeah, that's probably doable.
And, I think it's good to have goals. I think, based on the work that's happened so far, I think that we've got the time between now and then to come up with something. We did certainly build in the flexibility when we established the group to go beyond 6 meetings if we felt like our work was continuing or, not ready to wrap up. So, I think we would all probably agree that it's better to have a good product than to rush it. So, we're open and we're flexible in terms of those timelines. But I do think, given where we are, that that goal is still within our sights. So just wanted to put that out there as well. Okay. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you to your subcommittee members. We have a volunteer for our second subcommittee report out.
Sure, we'll go for communication and public education, and we're gonna add in the engagement part. I forgot to, you showed me in all fairness, Drew showed me the agenda and I forgot to make that comment again. So that's on me, but engagement is in there as well to emphasize the need for that.
We'll be sure to make that update next time, Terry. Sorry about that.
Thanks, and I'll remember. Greetings from Felipe Filomeno, who's our co-chair. Felipe is currently in Brazil, long-awaited post-pandemic trip to see family, so he wasn't able to dial in today. Touched base before he left. We were navigating vacations, and so there's been some communications back and forth about next steps. We didn't get everybody together in between meetings, but what we've been focused on is really starting to develop a communication plan, a communication playbook in concert with what we recognize as a need for outside expertise and folks that have done this work before. And so you're going to hear a somewhat similar song as from last month, but Dan was kind enough to request Dr. T to share the actual playbook that was developed for the Association of Community Services in Howard County. And that's been shared. They got homework this month, was we shared that with Dr. T's permission, and the group is reviewing that. Dan, I think we're okay if I put this out there that we're going to send that out to the entire work group with the materials that go along with this meeting. Got it.
Yeah, that's yeah. She didn't have any problem with us sharing the slides, and it's really interesting because it's her work for another. Essentially, it was a nonprofit set of service providers, but it was essentially for a local government. So it's kind of interesting in that sense.
Yeah, when we started describing the situation at hand and what we were trying to do, it was not unfamiliar to her at all. And so just like policy change and others, we recognize there really is an expertise to this. That it's more, Dan, I think that's why she calls it a playbook. It's not a strategic plan. It's not even a plan. It's a playbook because it has to be applied locally with local input, local impediments, and the like. And so we will share that with everyone and we'll welcome input on that or thoughts. Thanks in large part to our administrative officer. We've already gotten to work at the request of the subcommittee on putting together a small procurement that we can try to use to engage Dr. Manuel or others that do similar work to help us develop a similar tool. You know, to your question, Drew, I think having that wrapped up and having the initial, I guess, foundation of a playbook would be the contribution of the committee. And then the public input phase would be implementation that I would like to see taking place as we wrap this up and move forward into the next phase. So that may take a little bit of time, but there are, I think, toolkits that Dr. T had talked about and other things we can use to bring to bear, whether it's conversations with our own legislative branch in relation to, you know, you can look big picture, but there's also potential developments in the work now that are going to require conversations with community. And so these can be implemented on a micro or a macro setting. And so sort of playing that out, getting some of this. And then Drew, we haven't made the request yet, but we will as a subcommittee to consider whether we would be able to invite Dr. T to be a guest speaker at either the next work group session or the one following, if you think that's appropriate and we have the room. I think we've talked about a number of the issues. I think the subcommittee will be in a good place, and it might be nice to hear Dr. T's perspective on this. So we will put that request in to you. And Dan, with Felipe not here, is there anything you want to add on the subject or anybody else? Madam AO, anybody else on the committee?
Yes, so one piece we also discussed is in trying to develop our document. This is something that we talked internally about, and Drew, if you're comfortable with that, building within the scope of work that we're working on to engage with Dr. T, that some technical assistance on our actual report, building that into the scope of work was the other thing we discussed.
Great point. Thank you.
Yep, sure. That's great. Thank you, Terry and Madam AO and Dan for all of that information and your work there. I do think that if it can come together in time, it would be great to have Dr. T come in and present to the whole group and give everyone the opportunity to engage with her and ask questions about the playbook, which everybody, hopefully will have had the chance to review on their own before she comes in. On the playbook, if it's going to go to the whole group, Terry, I would just want to confirm that that's something that she's comfortable having shared publicly as well.
Dan, do we need to circle back, or was based on your
Maybe.
conversation?
I mean, I think it's fine, but it might be good to double check. Actually, yeah, since this is a very public meeting, it would probably be good to double check with her. So, which I can do that if you'd like me to do that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think if the document's distributed to the whole group, it becomes a public document.
It's essentially a public document,
so
right?
we just want to confirm that with her before we do that.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, Drew, that concludes our report. Thank you.
That puts me up next, I guess, then, right, Drew? Unless something else.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right, great. So this is the subcommittee looking at best practices on policy and legal side. We've gone through a number of conversations. I want to thank Derek Johnson for agreeing to be the co-chair of the subcommittee. And we just met this last week. One of the first things we talked about was the need for actually a policy statement. There is no current policy statement in the county, either in the consolidated plan or in any of our other documents, stating what our purpose or what our policy goal would be. So the one we've drafted, and we'll get this in people's hands, and I'll get it to Lisa for her to distribute, Drew, is that Baltimore County will create and preserve stable and affordable housing, inclusive of all neighborhoods, which promote economic mobility, provide access to quality education, healthcare, transit connections, and are guided by intentional strategies to dismantle a legacy of social and racial inequalities. We wanted to make sure it was not just about high opportunity areas, but about all the entirety of the county. We've looked at a number of issues that we're going to propose recommendations on, but I think as we used Pete's word earlier, we're still narrowing in on these. One actually follows on my question to Melody, is to address existing housing conditions in neighborhoods where we may need to either engage in rehabilitation or perhaps strengthening home ownership, neighborhoods that have housing stock that may not be quite as modern, but yet provide stable living environments. They may not necessarily and probably would not be in existing areas of opportunity that is the focus of the VCA. And our suggestion would be to perhaps pilot in two different parts of the county, one being Essex, that would sort of dovetail with the county executive's broader initiative. And secondly, either Lansdowne in the southwest, perhaps, or it was suggested Dundalk because they have a community development corporation. And it's really look at stabilizing the housing stock and being able to be more attractive for families and individuals in the future. We also then turn to the issue of incentives. And I want to thank Jim French, who provided a lot of important insight as a nonprofit developer on issues that he feels are critical. One is the issue of predictability, which clearly comes to not only the process by which plans are submitted and reviewed, but also then the standards, the zoning that's in place, a focus on capital subsidies beyond which the county currently is able to provide. He also talked about rent subsidies for operating costs to help drive down some of the costs and keep the units affordable, energy efficiencies, and also for the county to take a more active and aggressive role in providing land or helping to get land in the hands of developers. We discussed other funding strategies, such as the county administering its own bonds, as opposed to right now the state is administering the bonds for us, and for the county to take responsibility for that. An RFP for the allocation of project-based vouchers to incentivize developer activity, to create a pre-development fund, costs that are, if you will, the soft costs of getting a development into play before actual development takes place. We were supportive of, but have not yet discussed some of the ramifications of inclusionary zoning, and whether or not that might entail, for instance, a density bonus or other supports to make that happen. And then lastly, there was significant interest in the county taking more of the lead and not leaving it solely to the development community to bring us projects, but to actually set out clear articulated goals, policies and priorities that we're looking to see achieved, and to make sure that we are actually setting the tone for the future engagement of developers, in addition to them bringing us projects for us to review. So that's sort of the outline. Derek, or I don't know, Derek, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Steve, I believe you covered it all, but one of the things we did talk a great deal about was the county taking the leading role, which I think is very important for us to be the face that's out there that they see, and for us to be more proactive in trying to get this affordable housing and let people see that the county is really interested.
Thank you. Thanks for that addition. And that's it. Sorry.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Derek. Much appreciated. Same question, Steve. Do you feel your subcommittee is going to be in a position to start bubbling up some recommendations to the work group for discussion and potential inclusion in a draft report?
I think so, Drew. The last conversation helped us to narrow in a little bit more. I guess I would pose two questions. One is the opportunity for the committee, the work group as a whole, to look at the totality of the recommendations and sort of where that might fit in a time frame, since each of us are sort of three different groups independently coming, and yet all of us have to be in agreement, or at least more of a consensus at least, about what the final document is. And then secondly, the extent to which you are looking to have trends, data, and other information incorporated into the report to substantiate some of the recommendations, or if it's primarily recommendations at this point.
So on the first question, my thought is that we have to build in enough time into the timeline for the full work group to review a full draft report and make comments, edits, observations, as part of the process of report development, and have that done before the draft report gets posted publicly for public comment. So we'll have to build that into the timeline, Steve. On the second question, and this could be an area that if we do receive some technical assistance in putting the report together, it would be great to include background information on things and data points that we as a work group have looked at so far. I know that we shared a lot of data at the first meeting. We shared some data that the planning department put together at the second meeting. And there are other things that I think the subcommittees are looking at. So To the extent we can include background information like that that supports the need for recommendations, I think, we should strive to include that in the report.
Great, thank you.
Drew, do you know the actual date of meeting 6? You have that in front of you?
We do know the meeting date for meeting 6, but let me, don't have it written from me, so.
Okay.
It's
It is
October the 5th.
Oh, please
October the 5th. Okay. So that would mean that we would have to, the report would be, the draft report, and putting it all together would be definitely prior to October 5th.
Yeah, and we, I think, I can have a discussion with the subcommittee chairs and co-chairs about this following this meeting. But in terms of timeline, perhaps, we could look at draft recommendations, or at least an outline, at our next meeting, which would be our September meeting. So that can be discussed. They can all be discussed among the full work group during our September meeting, and then collated together and sent out to everyone as a draft in between the September and the October meetings, so that we could potentially get something posted after our October meeting. And with caveat, we can give ourselves more time if we need to. I think we'll have to kind of see how the next subcommittee meetings go and how our September meeting goes in terms of looking at and discussing some of those draft recommendations. Okay.
So in essence, Drew, the 6th meeting would be to discuss recommendations.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually proposing that to the extent we have recommendations from the subcommittees at the September meeting, which is our next one a month from now, we can use that meeting to start discussing recommendations as well. Because I get the sense from some of the subcommittees that between now and September, we'll at least have a sense of what some of those recommendations are going to look like.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you to the subcommittees. We've reached the portion of the agenda where the floor is open for comments or discussion from the work group at large. So the floor is open to anyone who has not had the opportunity to speak yet today, or even if you have, the floor is open. Okay, not hearing anything. I do see a question in the chat from Adam Phillips about whether the discussion of zoning classifications was just about residential or mixed use. I would say, and Ned just provided a response, that we've mostly been focused on residential uses, but we know that there is discussion about mixed use developments in the county, and obviously many of those mixed use developments that, are in the planning stages or, possible at certain sites around the county are going to have a residential component to them. And so to the extent that they do, I think the inclusion of affordability within that is within the scope of this work group, and something that I think we're likely to see some recommendations on. And at our previous meeting, there was a lot of discussion about inclusionary zoning and affordability requirements for new mixed use developments. And I do think that that's something that we will be hearing and discussing.
Drew, I'll just add from the work group, I mean, in terms of zoning classifications, I mean, we definitely, we did have, I see what Ned said, we focused on residential uses, but we did talk about mixed use zoning classifications and applying it to a greater degree of other commercial properties that could go mixed use. But I mean, as I think Melody mentioned, and I think Leslie brought it up in our work group, we got to be careful going down that road, because you don't want to send that into an area where it's not conducive for residential types of development, if you will. So we did have that conversation about mixed use zoning classifications where that would apply. But yes, it did focus on residential uses, as Ned mentioned. And Terry brings up mixed use or mixed income. Both, Terry, both.
He'd make sure I'm using my right terms on a regular basis.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pete.
But I've asked like previously, and this is a little bit different than what Pete was saying, if there's a mixed use, actual mixed use zone in Baltimore County. I think people have said that is it in the PUDs when it's mixed use? Is that what people have? I can't remember now the response. I know there's not an actual zone that's mixed use.
There are actually zoned, they're actually districts is what they call CTs and CCCs are mixed use development.
Okay, so that's what it is. What does that stand for again? CT and CTTs?
Oh God, community town center and community commercial, something I can't remember.
Okay.
You're testing the planners on the call.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah, what was talked about is, I don't know if it's expanding, but just seeing if you can create multifamily housing in current commercial or industrial zones, which in some sense could be okay, but that can't be like the full strategy, because it's just like, again, creating non-integrated housing, affordable housing, rather than affirmatively furthering fair housing. Then anyway, it's just like Melody said.
Yep, thank you. Anything else from any members of the work group or anyone that might be observing? Seeing anything else or hearing anything, we can go ahead and wrap up a little bit early today. Any motion to adjourn from anyone?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any objections? Not seeing any objections, we'll go ahead and wrap up the meeting there. Thanks everyone for another productive session. Thanks for your continued work on the subcommittees, and looking forward to our next meeting in September. As always, this meeting was recorded, and once we get the video edited, it'll be available. It will be available on our webpage.
Great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.